obviously, again. Wonder how this new time's gonna work.
Seems fine for me, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, totally. 7:05. I guess we should start, right?
Sure.
Yeah, cool. I need water.
I've got coffee, so.
Yeah, no, I figured you would. So yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pro Camera Reviews, episode 2, where the reviews team of the Phoblographer sits here and talks about the latest products that we are testing, the products that we have finished testing, and a couple other things in the photo world. I'm joined today by reviews editor Paul Ip. Say hi.
Hey, guys.
And gear editor Brett Day. Say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Just to let you guys know as well, too, this is a show that we do every Sunday here live on Zoom. And later on, we sort of share it to YouTube. And we're working on the idea of actually sharing it as a podcast. So you can sit there and listen to it in the background versus sitting there and listening to YouTube as you do whatever you want to. So today's show is a little more in tune with the name of the show. Like last show, we just talked about lenses, even though this is a show called Pro Camera Reviews. Today, we're actually talking about a camera. But what we're going to talk about today, I'll run that down pretty quickly. We're talking about Silbersaltz35 millimeter film from Silbersaltz35. They are a company based in Germany. And what they do is they basically take Kodak cinema film, cut it down, and repackage it for 35 millimeter film. Now, they're much different than CineStill because CineStill will remove the remjet later that makes it easy for you to develop it C41 at pretty much anywhere you go to. I think Costco and Walgreens. I know Walgreens still does it, but I'm not sure about Costco. I think I've heard people say Costco, but yeah. We're also talking about the Canon EOS Ra, which is Canon's special version of the EOS R designed for astrophotography. Brett did a review on that, spent a long time with it. He actually still has the lens and the camera, and we will be talking about that a little bit. We're also going to spend some time talking about our favorite macro lenses because everyone is really stuck in right now. We're going to talk about, a hobby that a lot of people do, which is macro photography. And lastly, we're going to talk about something that Dan Jin, one of our writers, actually wrote about. He's actually joining us here today. I'll probably unmute his microphone if he's good today. But he wrote a piece that was actually very telling called, now I'm actually forgetting the actual name, but it's about photography and depression and how he used photography to beat depression. It's something that him and I have actually talked about many times in passing, and we just decided that we would, work on the article. So, yeah, we're going to get right into it. So, Paul, Silbersaltz35 film review. This took a while for you to actually do, and you did it across a number of cameras, right?
It did. So I shot it using 3 different cameras. Just to show you guys, depending on if you order single rows or if you order a 4-pack. If you order a 4-pack, it comes in this little case right here. Obviously, I don't have the film anymore. It's used, but it's a pretty sturdy case for you to transport the film while you're on the go. So I tested all 4 different emulsions that they offer. The 50D, let me make sure I don't get this wrong. The 50D.
There's a 200 tungsten, I think.
Yeah, so it goes from 50D, 200 tungsten, 250D, and 500 tungsten. So by comparison, I know you mentioned CineStill. CineStill only has it in 50D, and I believe they have it in 1 tungsten variant.
800T.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So, the 3 cameras that I tested the film with was, this guy. I know Chris has one.
The Natura.
This is the Fujifilm Natura S. It's an excellent little point-and-shoot camera, super pocketable. I wish they made a version of this for digital.
It's a 24 1.9 lens on there, too, and it's super small. Turn it on. Show everyone, how small that thing is.
It is Let me see. So here's my iPhone 7 Plus, right? It's smaller than that, and obviously a little thicker.
A little.
Uh, well, like 4.5 times. Yeah. But yeah, so it's the controls are in Japanese, but you can pick it up pretty easily, and yeah. So the lens comes out, if you can see it. You know, built-in lens hood. It extends slightly, if you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, focusing back on the film. So the other camera I tested is with my vintage Leica M4, and also shot some of the film using my Minolta Maxim 7 or Alpha 7, depending on where in the world you purchase the camera.
And that's A mount, correct?
Yeah, it's the same as Sony's older A-mount system. So Sony actually purchased Minolta back in the day when they got into the digital imaging space. So the lenses for this Minolta I can actually adapt to modern E-mount cameras. I guess we could start. Well, do you want to just go through each emotion?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, if you want. Go ahead. I mean, well, first off, which one was one of your favorites? Because I know I also have images here that I'm going to show with people from this review.
Yeah, you want to put those up now?
Yeah,
or?
I can do that. Go ahead and talk.
So I'm kind of torn. So I do love all of them, but so especially the 50D can be a bit challenging to use sometimes because it basically all the number you see. So 50D is basically ISO 50 film. That's daylight balance, and then 200T is 200 ISO tungsten balance.
Mm-hmm.
So 50D can be very challenging to use, just because it's so hungry for light.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, so you need to like that's not something that you want to load into your camera casually because you're not taking that raw out of your camera until you're done on this film.
Yeah.
You need a lot of light.
One of the good things, though, about this is obviously you're being very careful about the images that you take. But when you are sending the rolls back for processing, they also scan it, and they sent you TIFFs and RAWs and JPEGs too, right?
So the RAWs are actually JPEG files, but they're uncorrected, and then you get color-corrected TIFFs using their own color science. So they're pretty good, quote unquote, out of the box, or as the files arrive.
Yeah.
But as you can see, Chris is showing on screen right now. You can see
this is an unedited one,
yeah,
and this is Paul's edit.
Yeah, the unedited version edited.
Yeah, this is unedited here.
Yeah, so this is actually a portrait I took of Chris one night when we were out having dinner. You could do a lot. Obviously, it's not true raw that you would get from a digital camera, but there's a lot of information in these scans. They're quote-unquote HDR film scans. So there's a lot of information there still for you to play with. And, the colors are great, contrast is great. And this is actually one of my favorite images to show what's capable of. Like, you look at this. This is the out of the box right now Chris is showing. So now let's go look at the edited one.
Okay.
Yeah, if you've ever watched older movies and anytime there's something neon on the screen, this is the look that you would see. There's not. I barely did any color correction on this. It's just a little contrast adjustment and curves adjustment. And if you look at older movies that has neon in it, this is what it looked like.
And that's a testament to the fact that this is Kodak movie film, right?
Absolutely. I think it's Kodak Vision 3.
Yeah, it's Vision 3.
Cut it from? Yeah. And also, if you go back real quick to that one neon shot, Chris.
Here's the unedited. Okay.
Yeah. So let's go look at it. So unedited, right? Even normally if you're shooting like backlit stuff, you would see some halation, and then look at some. Let's go to the next image.
Okay.
Yeah, you would normally see some halation. Like you look around the rows. If you were shooting this on Cinestel, which is cut from the same film stock, but like they removed the remjet layer, you'll see a lot of halation around subjects that are brightly backlit, and you don't see that at all when you're shooting with Silbersaltz 35.
You know, Paul, on second look at this image, I'm realizing just how incredibly sharp this film is too.
Oh, it is great. Like you obviously like I shot it with 3 different cameras, so it's varying degrees of sharpness. But if you've got a sharp like this is obviously not as sharp. Because I shot it on, I believe, yeah, I think I shot this on a 50 mil or 35 mil 2.8 lens on my Minolta. So here's another example too. You see how the gentleman's like he's got the light behind it, his head.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're shooting as a Sinister, you probably see like a red halo around his head.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, and you don't see that at all with Silbersaltz 35. Now, obviously, it's not a good or bad situation. This is just to taste. I personally I love Cinestill, and there are projects that I would still shoot with Cinestill, but it all depends on the look that you want to go for. Yeah, like look at this. Look at how sharp the Oculus is. I have to, yeah.
So this is the original, and here's the edit.
Right. So I did some color correction, and cropping, but other than that, like you could easily have made the shot on a digital camera. Yeah, same thing. It's incredibly sharp. These 2 images were shot using the Natura S, by the way.
Let alone look at the level of detail that you have in like the reflections.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah. Here's a portrait that you did.
Really
this is Sullivan Street, right?
Is it Sullivan Street?
I think it is.
It's lower. It's on the lower west side.
Yeah.
This obviously, just as a disclaimer, was shot last summer. Yeah, around last summer. Before the whole COVID-19 mess. Obviously, that area does not look as crowded today.
Yes, it does. Let's be honest. We've been there recently.
It's significantly less crowded. There's still plenty of not too smart people out and about, but
yeah.
So Grand Central is definitely empty now.
Yeah. But I think it's also really amazing the fact that like for just under $60, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now.
In terms of value proposition, right? Yes. If you were purchasing just a single row, I think it's £20 or $20. I forget if it was pounds or dollars. But if you get it in packs of 4, it's I think 60 or like 59 something.
It's like just under $60.
Yeah. So compared to Cinestill, which is about 13, 14 bucks a row.
Yeah, but so even
you're getting ECM2 processing since obviously the remjet layer is not removed. So that's true cinematic film processing, and you're getting high quality scans directly from Silbersaltz within I think 2 weeks, and you can even have the option of getting the negatives back if you want to for like a small. It's a nominal extra cost. You fill out your development form. So it's honestly great value for anything that you want to shoot or analog. That if you're a fan of that old school like Tarantino look, or like this is, or even some of the stuff that Christopher Nolan shot. He uses Kodak Vision 3 also. This is the same film style that's being used in Hollywood. So if you want to apply that cinematic feel to your images, and you're shooting analog, you don't have to rely on doing a lot of post-production work like in Photoshop to emulate that. You can just get it right out of the camera.
Yeah, but you also have to be really careful. Like, for example, you were exposing everything by an extra stop of light the same way you would negative film, right?
I mean, that's just in general. You shouldn't usually you push about stop anyways. But, anytime you're shooting film, you're shooting with intention.
Yeah.
So that's another thing too. That's great. It's just great in general about shooting film is you're significantly more deliberate about your choices, and you're more centered. You think a lot more about your composition and what you're trying to convey versus just on digital. You have the luxury of clicking and clicking and clicking.
Now here's my big question. Cinestill, because they remove that remjet layer, it has its significant signature look that people have just come to know about it.
That's what I was talking about. That little, like, that halation you would get.
Yeah, no, we've done that. We've have images like that all over the website for tests that we've done with Cinestill, but this doesn't really have that. So, could anyone really tell the difference between the images you get from this and some
Oh,
other film?
absolutely. Well, like the example I gave like earlier when we were looking at that gentleman that was backlit.
Yeah.
That image would not look the same.
Okay, let me bring that up again.
Yeah, it would look significantly different. And we shot that on Cinestill.
Okay, so this is the original.
Right.
Yeah, no, totally. But like, what about like Kodak Portra or like Fujifilm Superia or something like that?
I think it's still distinct enough that you could tell. I mean, the caveat is not many people know this film yet,
Right. Yeah.
so they're not going to be able to immediately identify. Oh, this was shot on Silbersaltz. Like that, I think that it's going to come in time.
And that's something that I think is really interesting because I mean, there are lots of folks online that just say like, "Oh, this looks like film," and there are whole communities around that.
Yeah,
And
but they really know what they're talking about because half the time all they're doing is they're muting like maybe green tones or they're adjusting the reds and they're just adding grain to an image.
yeah, and I actually feel like sometimes there's a lot of misinformation about that online.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise. Not like like no pun intended. There's a lot of noise in that area where people are just spouting things because it looks vintage. So.
I don't know if you can see Brett smiling at you and laughing at you.
No, that was totally unintentional.
Those puns are the best, man.
Yeah, really, right?
Are the best, yes.
For everyone watching live, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. I just want to also remind everyone that there's a chat on the side. If you enter questions into there, we will answer them later on after the show. But let's move on to Brett's review of the Canon EOS Ra. Now, this is your first camera in the new RF mount that you tested, right?
I mean, I've used the R before that a friend had, but I didn't really have an extended period with it. So, I mean, yeah, this is the first I've used for an extended period of time.
Yeah. And, you really thought pretty highly of the camera overall. Plus, it's a specialty camera, really designed for more astrophotography, even though you used it for a lot more than that.
Right, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the camera, it looks just like the R. I mean, it's identical in terms of its physical features, in terms of the button layouts and all that kind of good stuff. The specialty feature is the HA filter, which is placed over the sensor. And what that filter allows is for, I think it's 4 times more hydrogen alpha rays to be collected by the sensor. And that's the wavelength that nebula and galaxies of deep space objects will emit. So this camera is fantastic for astrophotography.
Now, how does that translate into the raw editing capabilities? I mean, some photographers have been like, oh, I really like Sony's raw editing more, but like the EOS R, and I mean, overall, just with the Canon's new stuff, I really actually thought they've done a pretty good job with versatility and color and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. The RAWs are fantastic. One of the things I really wanted to try when I got this camera was to see if you could actually use it during the daytime too. I had some reservations about using it because of the HA filter, but Canon does something with the white balance. So you can take shots during the day. And the colors actually look really pretty good. There was a couple of instances where some yellows looked a little more red, a little more pink maybe. But overall, they're great. The bad thing about editing the RAWs from daytime shots is if you try to adjust the white balance, your images will turn red instantly. So you have to leave the white balance where it is from when you shot the picture.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really bizarre.
So it basically means a lot of in-camera white balancing, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, if you want to use it during the daytime, you have to shoot on either automatic or daytime. and the images usually come out around the 3200 Kelvin range. But the instant you move that slider, they turn pink and red.
I mean, that could be an interesting project for someone.
Right.
That's
Absolutely.
I'm sure people in the Jersey Shore would love this camera.
You know, something that you were also talking about, Brett, that was sort of infuriating, even when I was rereading this review again, was the fact that the buttons don't illuminate in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. For a camera that was designed specifically to be used in the dark, for it not to have any kind of illuminated buttons is incredibly bizarre. Especially when this camera is like, I think $600 more than the regular EOS R. I would have thought that Canon would maybe have put in illuminated buttons on the back just to help out astrophotographers. And the other thing as well is there's no nighttime vision screen on the LCD either. If you use cameras like the Pentax K1 for example, you can make the screen illuminate red or glow red so that when you're shooting out at night, it won't alter your vision in the dark. And so when you use the LCD on this camera, it stops you from being able to see through the viewfinder more effectively for a little while your eyes readjust.
Fascinating. Speak to us a little bit more about the EVF. Like, how is it in the dark?
Well, once you have adjusted if you're using the LCD is so bright on this. So if you go from using the LCD to the EVF, it can take just a couple of seconds to get used to it again. But the EVF works great. It works fantastic. You can use the 30 times live view as well. So you can really get pinpoint sharp stars. But overall, it's fantastic. It's the same EVF as the EOS R.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just wondering if like maybe the sensor was affecting it a little bit differently because the direct sensor readout.
Right. No, it looks identical.
Well, that's great to hear. So it's easy to use, and then using the Canon rangefinder system they have built in, because I know you were also talking about manual focusing with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for astrophotography, you have to manual focus really. And as soon as you've located your object in the sky, turn it into a 30 times magnification, and you can fine tune the focus like so precisely because of that. It's fantastic.
So, you know, it's more money than the original EOS R, but I mean, I'm not quite sure that most photographers would necessarily go for it, even if they are shooting astrophotography. What do you think about that?
It depends on the type of astrophotography you're going to do. If you're just going to do astroscapes, you know, like all those images you see on Instagram with the Milky Way flying through the sky and you have foreground elements, this is not the camera for you. The specialized HA filter on this will be lost. This is really for an astrophotographer who wants to do deep sky photography. So if they're going to use a telephoto lens to focus in on nebula, or if they're going to adapt it to attach to a telescope, this is the camera you're going to want to use.
That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of which then, how is the high ISO output? Because that's something that's very important with a camera like this.
Oh, definitely. It's phenomenal. I mean, I shot a lot of the astro shots I took at ISO 6400, and they're clean. They're really, really clean. It's impressive. I even used it during the day. I've actually done some sports photography with it. Just, you know, why not? I had it with me. We give it a shot. And I took a team picture of a local high school wrestling team in a really dimly lit gym, ISO 6400, and the file was beautiful. Really good.
So it doesn't really have a lot of problem with like color noise or anything like that?
I mean, there's a little bit of color noise, but it's nothing you can't handle in post.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Plus, I know the prints are pretty clean as well, too.
Yes, absolutely, they are.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, you do shoot a lot of astro stuff, and I know you've been considering possibly buying into the EOS R system. Would you personally get the R or the RA?
That's a tough question. I would probably get the R, honestly. Even though I'm looking at doing maybe a little bit more deep sky photography, if you're already in that realm, that's fine because it can get super expensive to go into deep sky. But for the casual astrophotographer, I would personally get the regular R.
Yeah, that makes sense. Plus, I mean, in terms of just actual work, like let's say you're making taxable income from your photography, I think that the R is probably the more versatile option.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Cool. Any closing thoughts on this camera at all? I mean, do you think that the R5, there might be an R5A or anything like that coming in the future?
It could possibly be. Who knows?
What'd you say, Paul?
Like, I wonder how much that's going to cost.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. I'm actually wondering how much the R5 is going to cost. They haven't really said anything yet.
I have some thoughts on that, but we'll see. It might not even come out this year with everything that's happening.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would guess probably around $34.99 somewhere.
That's that's about what I would put that at.
Yeah. It's also really interesting too because I thought like, okay, it's an Olympics year.
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. Like everything was going to be pushed like really heavily, and no, nothing. Like Sony got out the A9 II.
Yeah.
No Olympics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nikon announced the D5. Canon announced the 1DX Mark III.
Mm-hmm.
And no Olympics.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In retrospect, almost makes you think that some of these companies could have just waited and improved on what they announced.
I wonder if that'll happen now, actually, like more firmware improvements or something like that.
Well, I think as a trend overall throughout the whole industry, there's going to be more of that. Fuji kind of led the way with the firmware updates, which, I to this day applaud them for. And, you're seeing that with Sony, with Canon, with Nikon. Like, the firmwares effectively give you a brand new camera.
Yeah. Actually, that's one of the things that Olympus touts pretty often whenever I'm in meetings with them. And speaking of which, we are getting into our next segment, which is macro lenses. We decided that we would talk about macro lenses right now because of the fact that everyone's really indoors and they're trying to figure out what they can do with their photography, and some people are just looking for projects to do. We published the other day, actually, a list of a couple of projects, and we published a couple of videos that we shared and that people send us via email. So macro photography is something that a lot of hobbyists like doing, like the food world does it. People that are really into watches do it. I'm actually back to wearing 2 watches right now.
For sure.
Yeah, right. I wanted to have some sense of normalcy again. So I was like, okay, fine. Exactly, normalcy. So yeah, so Brett finished this compilation post that we do pretty often, like every day or so, of some of the best macro lenses that we reviewed. And I figured, we should probably talk about some of our favorite macro lenses. So Brett, why don't you go first?
Well, I've used a lot of macro lenses down through the years, but the one I'm enjoying right now is the Olympus 60mm Emswico f2.8. It's tiny. Yeah, it's like 3.5 inches long. It's a wee
little thing.
It's minuscule. It weighs absolutely nothing. It's razor sharp. I mean, when I very first got this lens and attached it to the EM1 II and started playing around with it, it really just blew me away of how razor sharp this thing is. It's not the fastest focusing lens ever, but the images that you can produce with this, especially when you use it on the EM1 II with the IBIS as well, you can use this handheld and get immaculately sharp macro shots, no problem at all.
That's the lens that I really wish I had right now, because I actually still have the EM1 Mark III with me from the trip at Costa Rica. And I really wish I had that lens, because that lens, I did like it. I liked the weather sealing.
Yep.
But in addition to that, too, I think that Micro Four Thirds is in this really unique position when it comes to macro photography, because of the fact that follow with me for everyone that's listening and watching, please. So because the sensor is a 2x crop factor, there's also double the depth of field at a given aperture. So for example, at f1.4 in Micro Four Thirds, you're at the equivalent of like f2.8 in full frame, but you have the light gathering abilities of f1.4. So with macro photography, first off, a lot of newbie photographers will sit will sit there and they will try to shoot macro with natural light or ambient light, and they'll shoot wide open. And I think that that's a really, really huge mistake for macro photography. You have to really stop down. So in this case, you can stop down like f8 and basically get the equivalent depth of field of f16. And then you can just use a flash, because everything is going to be so soft anyway, because you're focusing on such a minuscule detail. And I think that's one of the best advantages of Micro Four Thirds for macro photography.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
Have you done a lot of macro stuff with that lens, Brett?
I have. I wish I'd sent you some pictures. I actually just picked this up the other night. There's a moth that landed on my desk right next to me. And I actually found out about this the other night. Did you know moths play dead if you approach them?
You're
Which
kidding,
is really
right?
bizarre. Yeah. So anyway, this moth landed next to me. I picked up the lens. I grabbed my flash, my remote on the top, and I set the lens to 2.8, so it's equivalent 5.6, and handheld, got a razor sharp image of this moth's eye, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And then going back to the little moth deal, I went to bed and that thing dive bombed me.
And then you got your macro lens again.
It was this payback for me flashing him in the face with my flash.
What'd you get for flashing people, Brett?
Yeah.
But yeah, I've used it outside to take pictures of flowers, and I've used it indoors, and man, it's just a phenomenal lens. It's like I say, especially on the 4/3 sensor system.
Yeah, they're also really instrumental to us as journalists, because we can use them to really photograph details. I know Paul does that, and I do that pretty well.
Yeah, I use a macro pretty much 95% of the time for any product shots I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about the one you use.
Okay, here's so not as small as the one Brett's got. This is the Sony f2.8 90 macro. It's a G lens, not a G Master, but it is a G lens. It's stabilized, and one of my favorite things, you don't see this a lot on Sony lenses. It's got a very easy to use manual focus clutch that's sometimes a little bit too easy to use. I've bumped it by accident, and I'm like, why is my AF not working?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've done that before. It's got a depth of field. I don't know if you can see it. It's got, the field scale that actually works. I love this lens, and a lot of times when you're shooting macros, most people are doing it on a tripod, especially if you're like going to do some serious focus stacking work, because you don't, obviously you want the whole frame to not change, right? So unless I'm doing that, if I'm just shooting products, this lens, the stabilization plus my camera stabilization, this is my A7R4 right here. The combination of that allows me to shoot products handheld at a reasonably, deep, like high depth of field. And my images are sharp. I don't have to deal with softness or anything, or out of focus images.
What you should also note is that you basically inject coffee into your veins every day, so it's
I'm doing that right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's counteracting the fact that you basically shoot up on.
Yeah, it's super sharp too. And as someone so I shoot, for what I do normally for client work, I shoot a lot of headshots and portraits. I've actually used this guy for headshots and portraits before. It allows me to get up close to my subject. I get all the details, and the book is actually pretty damn nice too.
Yeah. Plus, it's very well weather sealed.
Yeah, it's a G lens. It's dust and splash proof.
Splash resistant. Yeah.
Yeah, don't go swimming with it, but anything that your camera can take, this lens can take too.
Yeah.
Like I actually just the other day I shot some product images in the rain using this particular combo.
That's so fun to do, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a little cold, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this lens. And It's super versatile and it's pretty cheap too. I think it's well under $1,000.
Yeah, and plus you can get it used or something else like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you get a good used one probably for even like 6.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So let me talk about the lens that I use for macro pretty often, and then I'll talk about a couple other systems. So this is the IRIX 150 millimeter f2.8 Dragonfly lens, also not small. You know, this is Olympus's 12 to 45 f4.
Is that the RA? I mean, sorry, the R.
Yeah, this is the R.
Okay.
So it's not small. But in addition to that, too, it's also, to be very fair, this is also adapted. It's an EF lens that I adapted to EOS R because when I bought the EOS R, I bought it with the adapter so we could test, you know, EF mount lenses. And this lens is really sharp. It's got beautiful colors. It has this like really beautiful extra sharpness that you can get with it when you put a circular polarizer on. I've done a number of things with that with watch photography and even when I'm out testing. Uh, Beautiful colors, very good build quality. They're affordable. The only thing is that it's manual focus, which can be very daunting when it comes to macro photography. I mean, a lot of photographers, when they get super, super close, like this is my finger. Okay, getting closer. You're going to focus closer. You're going to focus even closer. You're going to focus even closer. Yeah. When you start to focus super, super close, a lot of photographers will do that. But for this, it's like, you know, I don't always need to do that. So I usually combine it with the Canon rangefinder system. So I'll take the autofocus point, I'll put it all over a specific thing, and then I'll focus in and out. And using contrast, Canon will tell me whether or not that subject is actually in focus. Combine it with peaking. Yeah, it's overall just a solid lens. I can't really complain about it. It's big. I wish that they made it for mirrorless, but IRIX, you know, they've been saying for a while they will make lenses for Sony FE, but they haven't done it yet. And they just announced the 45-1.8.
Yeah, they don't have any native FE lenses.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all DSLR lenses.
Yep.
Yeah. They actually just announced that 45-1.8 and they were hitting us up about review units, and I was like, okay, well, depending on who you're what you have available will vary and depend on like what reviewer we send it to, because I know they're doing it in Pentax K mount, so I was like, you know, let Brett test that. But if they're doing it if they only have EF mount units available, which is usually the case with a lot of companies that we hit up for reviews, then I'll most likely be the one to test it.
That's a surprising choice that they have it available for K mount and not some of the others.
Yeah, I was wondering that myself too. It's probably easier for them when it comes to design to actually like modify it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it can be pretty difficult at times too, because like, for example, I remember this one time when I was working at B&H Photo, one of the guys came up to me. He was working in like affiliate sales, and he was like, hey, is there any way that I can adapt a Canon lens to a Nikon mount? And this was just DSLR stuff. And I was like, actually, no, that's not really possible. And they're like, no, it has to be possible. I'm like, no, because of the flange distance, like in science, it's not really possible at all. Yeah. So with that said, like, it's even more confusing to me, because I would at least personally think that mirrorless would be easier to do because there's so much less flange distance, and everyone's using really large rear elements anyway to cover all that area.
Well, I mean, you see that with, you know, all the lenses up until very recently with Sigma. All they're doing really is slapping an adapter at the end of existing lens designs.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but I don't think I would hope that manufacturers aren't always doing that, you know.
No, I think we're at the point where people are actually designing dedicated lenses for mirrorless, because the performance differential, it's huge.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I remember when you and I were testing some of those Sigma
Oh
lenses
my
in
goodness.
the studio, and they were so slow to focus. But like the stuff that's actually made for mirrorless is a lot faster.
Yeah, it hurts too because some of those lenses I adore, absolutely adore. Some of those lenses,
Yeah,
it just in the studio environment, they're so dull, slow.
yeah, and heavy. I mean, that 105 millimeter.
Well, that 105 is an outlier. That thing is just obnoxious.
I remember I called it a mammoth, and one of my reps was like, "Did you really have to call it a mammoth?" I'm like,
Well,
"Yeah,
I mean, own it. That thing is it's Big Bertha.
yeah,
Yeah, that thing is like it's huge.
yeah,
You know, so yeah, that thing is it's just obnoxiously large and heavy. You know, unless you're like sadistic like me, that attempt to hold it like single-handedly. Even I wasn't able to do that for like more than maybe like 20 minutes. It's just it's ridiculous.
yeah." It just means you have to do more push-ups before you hold it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Louise.
It's pretty funny right now. Michael was actually saying in the chat, I saw a guy in the street with a Nikkor 200 millimeter f2 freaking Nizuka. That thing is also very big. Just imagine that
It's
mounted
like
camera.
yeah, that's like old school trade show days when you get all the jabronis in the back sniping both models.
Oh man,
Yeah.
that's a word I haven't heard in forever. Jeez, what is this, WWF back in the Vince McMahon days?
Hey man, everything's coming back.
Yeah, I know it is. A couple lenses I wanted to talk about really quickly in the macro world. The Fujifilm 60 millimeter f2.4 macro, that was one of the first ones that Fujifilm launched. That's actually still one of my favorites. It's gorgeous. It's very small. It's not a full one-to-one macro, but you can focus very closely with it, and then it also doubles as something like a really nice portrait lens or something like that. It becomes a 90.
Yeah.
So it's gorgeous. Things that I shoot with macro lenses, as I said, watch photography. I should really get back into shooting food. Like the other day, actually, no, not the other day. I'm sorry. Just today, I took a photo of an apple that I cut up, and I just put like cinnamon on it to be like cinnamon apple. Just because I felt like shooting a photo and sharing it again. And I haven't actually done that since I'm taking this 1 year long break from my personal Instagram right now for just mental health. So I'm trying to like uh offset things. Like I did a project and I put it on Behance, and I'm sharing photos on Facebook, and
That's liberating, isn't it?
it's really liberating.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, like I'm trying to figure out whether I want to really stay on Behance, really stay on Facebook, or like go back to Tumblr or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard to decide.
Are there any other macro lenses that you guys have tested that you really liked?
Trying to think.
Brett, anything for Pentax?
Not that I can think of for Pentax, no.
Yeah, you already mentioned the Fuji one, which I've tested. I haven't tested, but I've used it before, and I quite enjoy that ones as well.
Yeah.
I have a feeling we're going to see some of that coming from Canon and Nikon for RF and Z mount, because right now they don't have a dedicated mirrorless macro lens.
Canon has the 35-1.8.
Yeah, but that's not 1-to-1, is it?
I don't think it's 1-to-1. No,
Yeah,
it's very close. I think it's like 1-to-2.
You could always adapt the Canon 100 millimeter f2.8.
That's true. Also, you have pseudo macros if you're a Sony FE shooter. You have the trinity of pseudo macros, those 2.8 lenses that they came out with last year. They have a 1-to-2 macro ratio, but you could get real close.
Yeah.
Your subject. So depending on the use case, that might work as well, and they're pretty darn affordable.
All right, really quick, wrapping up this segment, and then we're moving on to photography and depression. Do you guys think that every photographer needs a macro lens?
Need is probably a strong word. You should probably have one in your kit. You know, like the example I used earlier, even as a portrait shooter, I'll break mine out all the time, especially if I'm shooting like beauty work that I need to get up close on.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a street shooter, probably not. You know, it really depends on what you shoot. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Brett.
Again, I wouldn't say everyone needs one, but I would say if any photographer really wants to challenge their skill sets, to pick one up, because macro photography is one genre that will really put your skills to the test. It is not an easy genre to master. So if you really want to push yourself, definitely get one and give it a try.
Yeah, if you're the type of person that loves details and loves getting technical with things, macro photography, you could burn hours, just not even master it.
Yep.
And right now, plenty of us have plenty of time, so might be worth investing.
I honestly think every photographer needs a wide angle macro lens. I don't think that everyone necessarily needs a telephoto one. I think the telephoto ones are a little bit more specialty, like they can double as landscape lenses or portrait lenses or something like that. But the wide angle ones will help you with so many different things that you need to shoot whenever you need to get very close, like street photography. You could get close. I'm not saying you should get macro close up to your subject and then, flash them Bruce Gilden style at all.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
That would be obnoxious. I can imagine Dan doing that, actually. But no, actually, I couldn't imagine him doing that because he's a lot more laid back and soft about it. Same with Mark. I would probably do it just to be a jerk. But yeah. But wide angle macro lenses are actually very useful for like walkabout stuff. Like if you want to shoot food one day and then you're going from that to shooting street and then you're going from that to let's say you're taking a tour of like a mountaintop or something like that. Like that lens will be very instrumental to you. But more importantly, in that case, then I think that like 28, 50, 40 millimeter and 35 millimeter, because those are really mimicking the human eye, are really probably the most important for macro work.
That's a good point, actually, because there are times when I'm like shooting products with the 90 that I wish I had something a little bit wider. So yeah, it's actually giving me some thoughts right now. So I might have to invest in something a little bit on the wider end.
Yeah. There are some for Sony, but not a whole lot.
There's that 50, but it's a little loud. So
I can't hear you over the sound of its motor. Can you say that again?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, let's move on to our last segment, which is Can Photography Treat Depression? And for this, I'm going to unmute Dan Jin, the writer that wrote it, and hopefully his connection is stable. Come on.
Hey guys.
Oh my! Oh! Face!
It's DJ Dan in the house.
It's baby face! Oh man, this is perfect. Nice.
Dan, do we have to send you
okay?
some more wet naps for your camera?
Maybe. Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad idea. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We can hear you perfectly fine.
Smashing.
Yeah, seeing you, it's like looking at basically like an old like 640 by 480 television. Like I feel like I'm watching a remastered version of I Love Lucy or like Three's Company or something. Yeah.
In better light, it looks
a
bit better.
Okay.
In better light, it looks a bit better. I would hope so.
Okay. Yeah, I'd hope so instead of looking worse. All right, let's get into this. So, can photography treat depression? Let's have Dan talk about this article first. So, Dan, you want to talk about it?
Absolutely. To answer the question in short, yes. From personal experience, absolutely it can. I wrote the article and it was a little bit of it was a self-profile, and it was about my journey kind of through my early 20s, dealing with the angst and pressures that a young person may face and dealing with them in rather unhealthy ways. I spoke in the article, drink and drugs, things like that.
Oh,
and yeah, a bit of that and a bit too much. And then, photography kind of became a healthy route of escapism from, you know, just the general challenges that a person has to face throughout life, especially street photography, which is a very intensely focused kind of practice, as in you really can't stop taking your eye off the scene for a split second because you may lose an image, right? And that process of just being in the moment, and I said this in the article, it was a kind of form of meditation, really did help with some of the more just negative thoughts that I was having, and that was just by being present and focusing on creativity. And then in time, yeah, it became a passion, and now I don't really use it to treat depression. It's just my life that I love.
You mean you love depression? Is that what you're saying?
No, absolutely not. I love photography. Photography was a healthy route out of depression, and now it's just a thing that I practice daily for the love of it. But who knows? Maybe if I stopped, maybe I'd go into a darker place again. I'm not prepared to find out and answer that question.
Yeah. In your article, you were actually specifically referencing street photography because you really need to be present, like you were saying, and you really need to be very in the moments. Mm-hmm. Do you think that, and you know, I hate really bringing gear into this, honestly, because this is something that's more about mental health. Do you think that certain pieces of gear can help you, because of the tactile experience, to be very much into what you're doing?
In a way, yeah, certainly the Fuji cameras. So I use the Fuji X-T2, and I shoot manual. So one of the great parts of that is it's very, because you can set your aperture through the lens. You're obviously doing your shutter speed and your ISO as well. It's very thought out, like you feel it, rather than just doing it digitally through pressing a button. The connection between you and the camera is, I can't really describe it without sounding maybe a little bit weird, but it's kind of spiritual. Like it's a loving process. And
the camera is your spirit animal, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's, you know, you're not going to see me on, like, you know, BuzzFeed, you know, guy marries his camera. I'm not going to be that guy, but it's that
would probably be me.
Yeah.
Coming soon, April 1st now.
Right.
Yeah. But no, there's certainly a physical relationship when you're in the process of creating images and you're in the process of setting your exposure that does fill you with more positive feelings, endorphins as well. I certainly, and the click, the sound of the shutter on the Fuji, every time I hear it, I can just feel the endorphins just go.
I remember this when we were walking around New York, and you were just like, "Oh, I love the sound of that thing."
Well, I mean, going to, like, what, you know, touching upon what Dan just brought up, though, especially if you shoot manual, like, the camera becomes an extension of yourself.
Absolutely.
You know, so like you're using it to create, but that spirit of creation comes from you first and foremost.
Yeah, I've actually been using it for, you know, my in-camera paintings and stuff like that. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm... Pardon?
No, you've been doing that for a while now.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm depressed. I might be, but I use it to really get me out of darker times because it helps me actually create and express myself a lot more. A project that I've been working on for a really long time. Actually, I wouldn't say it's a project, but like a concept that I've been working on is, because I'm legally blind, I've been trying to get the world to understand the way that I see. And I did this with a series I did a while ago called Caught on Tape, that was really about like taking images and then sort of running them through these filters and making them look like old school VHS tapes and bringing back the nostalgia and all that kind of stuff, and talking about how things were lo-fi, but now it's all about embracing like full blur to make things look like paintings and multiple exposures and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, personally, I feel that stuff is pretty therapeutic, and it reminds me that even though I have this disability, I can always create. But that's just me. I mean, what about you, Brett? You've been pretty quiet, man.
Yeah, I mean, I suffer from depression as well. And I mean, for me, photography, it's not so much the act of taking the picture. It's when I get back home and I look at my images and I think back to how I felt when I took the image. And when I look at the image, how the image makes me feel now. And, you know, that whole process helps me understand myself better. And also one of the big things about depression is sometimes it's even hard to just get out the door. So just having a camera as an excuse to get out of the door and interact with your community and make yourself feel like you're part of something is a big deal as well.
And you're speaking specifically to a physical camera versus like a phone camera or something like that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, now that I'm thinking about it, did you ever go storm chasing with that phone attachment? Brett was testing these lenses for a phone camera, and he purposely was like, "Hey, can I delay this review a little bit because I have the chance to like go photograph this storm?" And I'm like, am I really reading this way? Like Sam's allowing him to do this? Or...
Well, Sam just now found out about this, so I'm sure this is going to be a conversation I have later on. But no, I didn't get. Yeah, I didn't get to go. Yeah, it's all good. I didn't get to go because it was right when the whole COVID thing was kicking off, and he wanted to go solo.
Just kidding.
Yeah. Man, this is 2 weeks in a row you've got me in the doghouse. What is up with this?
What about you, Paul?
In terms of whether or not photography can help mitigate depression?
Yeah, like, what are your thoughts on it? Has it affected you personally?
Well, it very much has affected me personally. I think I've shared this with you, but like, I'm talking about Chris. But not too many people. So just a bit of background. I come from the corporate tech world. In the previous life, I was in corporate IT, I was in-house and also doing consulting work. And it got to a point where I was super burnt out and just, you know, I'm sure a lot of people kind of have that experience where they just don't want to get out of bed because it's just, you know, it's more of the same and you're bored with, you know, work or whatever it is that you have to do. And that was certainly true for me. So at that point, I hadn't picked up a camera, like not counting like a point and shoot or anything. Like I hadn't picked up an actual camera with manual controls on it for maybe like at least a decade. And, you know, I got to the point where I knew I needed to get away and take some time away from what I was doing to kind of just reevaluate the path I was on in life. So I took a trip to Ireland, and that wasn't a perfect excuse for me to bring a camera along with me because, you know, obviously you go to Ireland, you kind of want to, you know, you're not there all the time. You want to capture, you know, the sights that you're seeing. And through that trip, it kind of showed me that I should have been shooting all along. And it basically helped me change career paths, and it's led me to meeting all of you. And it's profoundly affected my life. You know, like when I started shooting again during that trip, it almost felt like I was rediscovering a part of myself that I was always a creative person when I was growing up. And, you know, part of growing up Asian is that, you know, you got to go into like the prescribed career path because you don't want, you know, you want to be successful and you want to please your parents, right? So I did all that.
I totally did not do that, but okay.
Well,
I was like, screw you guys. Like,
I had my, so I mean, I kind of had my somewhat rebellion with that because my parents wanted me to be teachers, and I was like, no, I do not want to be teachers. Even though, funny thing now is I teach photography a lot in seminars. So, but anyway, going back to this, is like when I picked up the camera again for the first time when I was on that trip, it kind of reignited that creative spark that I had kind of, you know, subconsciously put aside. and it's completely changed my life. I was a lot happier after I started shooting, and obviously it wasn't great back then when I was picking up the camera again. Like, the fundamentals were still there. I knew how to change my shutter speeds. I knew the relationship between the exposure triangles, stuff like that. But it took me a little bit to kind of reacclimate to shooting constantly. But it's brought me to where I am today, and I can definitely relate to what Dan went through. It's definitely life changing, and it allows you to exercise a different part of your brain that you may not always get to tap into. So,
Yeah.
I think it's definitely healthy for everyone, to just get out and shoot.
Yeah.
And it helps boost confidence. And again, I said this in the article, it's when you go through the process of creation and you see it through from beginning to end, there's a level of pride that comes from that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important that we separate relative depression and clinical depression. I think what
Yes.
I had was relative depression. It was just circumstantial. It wasn't something that was necessarily a clinical thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why photography helped me overcome it. Whereas maybe someone who's clinically depressed, photography can help them manage it rather than overcome it. But yeah, the process of creating something and seeing just from your own personal perspective, it doesn't need to be adored by people, and taking pride from it, it fills you up with such positivity. And I'm trying not to make this airy fairy, but it's the truth. It fills you up with pride. And when you're proud of yourself, you've got much of a more positive and energetic and enthusiastic outlook on life, 100%.
Well, that's a good point too, Dan, because it's so important that what you're creating speaks first and foremost to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people right now, like, they're creating for the sake of being liked and accepted, and ultimately you're just trading one void for another. So you have to first be able to satiate that creative drive within you and be satisfied with that first and foremost. And even if no one else likes your photos, if you're happy with it and you like the process of creating got you out of the house, got you out of bed, and and when you look back on these photographs, it fills you with a sense of pride and happiness and joy. That's the most important part.
Do you think that as every photographer is developing their photographic identity, that they start to think about the idea of creating versus capturing? And sometimes they might realize, oh, I'm actually just capturing something. Maybe I should try to create and put a little bit more of myself into this image.
Totally.
Yeah. That's what I figured.
I think it's important just to, in the first early days, just to capture, which helps you with the fundamentals of photography.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing that right now. Yeah. Yeah, I was about to say, you're doing that right now because, like, you were shooting, like, straight, and now you're doing portraiture these days, right?
Yeah. And going from one genre to the other, which you can cross over, but there's certainly differences in terms of knowledge and just expertise and confidence in the process. If I go and do a portrait shoot now, it kind of reminds me when I first started going out on the street, like almost 8 to 10 years ago, and taking photos of random people in candid environments. There was always that kind of angst, like maybe imposter syndrome really is what I would say. There was a bit of imposter syndrome, and that carried over now to portraits. But the more you do it, it's good. It's good to feel uncomfortable. It's good to learn the fundamentals. And then once you've got that on lockdown, you can start expressing yourself and kind of your creative vision to be more of a creator rather than a capturer.
Yeah, and I think that also, it takes a little bit of soul searching for you to actually listen to yourself as well too. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, that is the end of our show. I'm going to cut the recording here, and I'm going to open it up to everyone to talk freely, whatever they want to. Thank you guys so much for tuning into episode 2 of pro camera reviews. We're going to be back next week. And yeah, folks, take care.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you, guys.